Welcome to freedomlovin.com, where we focus on building freedom in an unfree world. Through personal development, location independence, and passive income strategies. Now here's your host, Kevin Koskela.
Welcome to Freedom Lovin'. This is Kevin, and this is episode number 45. And in just a minute, I have an interview with Gregory Diehl, and his website is marketfit.net. And it's a really interesting conversation. We talk about philosophy and location-independent entrepreneurship and travel and just kind of making something of yourself in the unfree world we live in. So definitely stay tuned for that. I'm going to keep this intro really short today because I was so excited to talk to Gregory that it went a little bit overtime. But I don't really have a set time on these anyway, so it's not really overtime. It's just a little bit longer than usual. So just a quick update on my business number one of the 6 businesses I'm doing this year, the SEO writing. Last week was a great week. I put some work into it. I actually haven't been coming close to the 2 hours a day that I said I would be doing, but I did get a gig, and it was not from all my cold emailing, but from just kind of reaching out to people that I know. And so a friend of mine needed some writing, some articles, and so I'm going to work with him. I can't divulge who it is. It's kind of top secret, but I can tell you kind of a little bit about what it is. It's going to be writing about some of the stuff I talk about on this podcast and some kind of more of the world events and things like that. But I'll be doing 3 articles a week, and I'm going to be getting about $500 a month. So it's a gig. It gets me started. I think I can find places in the world where I could live on $500 a month, but that's not my only income. So luckily, that's just kind of a little addition to what I'm already making. But it is a little bit of a time commitment. I think I am going to be putting in probably 6 hours a week on the writing. But it's fun. I did an article yesterday and I enjoy it. So that's going well. You can see more on the blog. Just go to freedomlovin.com. I'm posting once a week. I'm posting what's been going on with the businesses and kind of how I'm spending my time and the challenges and the good things that are happening. So if you want to subscribe to that, just go to freedomlovin.com. And then just one more thing I wanted to mention before the interview. I've been having some shoulder problems, and I've had kind of a shoulder injury on my left rotator cuff since I was in college, and that was a long time ago. When I was swimming a lot, I got some tendinitis in my rotator cuff, and it never really went away. It's been, I've gone through years where there's no pain, and I can swim and I can do everything, but it's still kind of there. I can feel it. But over the past 6-8 months, my shoulders on both sides have gotten really sore and painful. And the right shoulder actually was from playing volleyball back in San Diego for years. I played a lot of beach volleyball and in addition to swimming. So I kind of put a lot of pressure on that shoulder. So that's been bothering me for a while. But I think what has happened is, last summer I was in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, and I was doing a lot of swimming, and I didn't have any shoulder pain, oddly. But then what happened is after the summer, I took about a month off, and then I noticed that both shoulders were starting to hurt. And I wasn't doing anything. I was doing kind of my normal exercise routine, but nothing out of the ordinary. So what's happening is when I'm not using those shoulder muscles, and I'm sitting a lot during the day on my computer, and I'm kind of leaning over, my shoulders are forward, it's causing this kind of pressure on the shoulders, and it kind of causes them to tighten up. And so I'm finally, with all that said, I'm going to a massage guy here in Austin, and his specialty is kind of helping people recover from injuries. And he's worked on a lot of shoulders. So I'm going to him. Went to the first session yesterday, and it was pretty awesome. And it was painful, but I think he got to exactly what was going on. So that is a warning to not sit all day. And so it's tough because I think a lot of people listen to this show work on computers, do some sort of work on computers. So it's hard to not sit. Even if you have a standing desk, sometimes it's hard to not sit. Because there's a lot of times, like for me, where I need to leave my apartment. I can't just work all day in my apartment. So I end up going to coffee shops, and usually there's not really a good place to stand. Sometimes there is. There was actually one in San Diego I used to go to that had a nice little standing area where I could stand and work, but mostly it's like you're just sitting. So it's so important to try to find some time to stand during the day. When I do podcasting, I stand. And then I try to take a lot of walks, although that doesn't seem to be enough. I think it's more of the sitting for long periods of time that's screwing me up. So, but I think this posture thing is so important, and how you sit is also really important. So you want to kind of be able to lean back in your chair, actually, and have some sort of support on your arms, so you're not just reaching out to your computer and putting strain on your shoulders. So if you have never had any kind of issues from sitting a lot, then good for you. That's awesome. But I have, and I think it's definitely something that I have to consider moving forward with business, because I just can't sit all day. I just can't sit for long periods of time. So I'm focused now on doing some standing desks type of stuff in the morning, and then maybe doing more of my sitting in the afternoon, but trying to alter it and mix it up, and then also continuing to do the walking and things like that. So let me know if you have any good tips on this besides just buy a standing desk, because as someone that travels all the time, I don't want to be buying desks and dragging them around. That would be annoying. So I do makeshift kind of standing desks, which is what I'm doing now. And yeah, so anyway, I hope that you are not experiencing the same things that I am, but let me know if you are. And that's about all I have. Here's my interview with Gregory Diehl. Stay tuned for that. Have a great week, and go out there and build some freedom. All right, well, I'm really excited today to have Gregory Diehl on the show. He is a location-independent entrepreneur, and he helps people make a profit by making a difference. And his website is marketfit.net. Hey, Gregory, welcome to Freedom Lovin'.
Great to be here, Kevin.
Awesome. So can you talk a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Oh, well, I suppose my background is that I don't have a background. Maybe that's what makes it interesting. Well, I mean, I was raised in San Diego, California, where I spent about the first 18 years of my life. Went through the public education system, where I learned how to hate a lot of things about society. Yeah, I was definitely not well suited for standardized education for a lot of reasons. And then when I graduated high school, I didn't really know what to do with myself. I just knew I didn't want to go to college.
Nice.
And I was very ready to go out and explore and start living my own life. So I had a friend living in Costa Rica, and I just got a one-way ticket down there, having no idea or very little idea what I was actually getting myself into, speaking no Spanish, hardly ever having left California before, and never having left the U.S., and I ended up staying for a year, just sort of adapting to life down there. Came back to California after that, realized how miserable I was back there, experienced my first real instance of reverse culture shock.
Yeah.
And from there, for the last 6 or 7 years, it's just been sort of this progressively growing thirst, this hunger to understand how the world works and to see it firsthand and really start living life the way I want to.
That is awesome. So now, how did you kind of experience the U.S.? Like, what were the downsides that you were seeing that you said you were kind of miserable living in California?
Well, it's hard when it's the only thing you've ever known, right? And especially when you're a kid or a teenager or a young adult. Yeah. You know, California to a lot of people seems like a paradise,
right.
Of course. And it is in its own way. But when you grow up there, you know, you just feel there's a lot of control there. There's a very, at least the public school system is my main beef with with how I was raised. And in all regards, you know, I grew up in Encinitas, which is a very pleasant place.
Right.
You know, it's this perfect little beach town, but that is precisely why I didn't like it, because I had questions that needed answering. You know, I wanted challenge, I wanted change, I wanted newness and novelty and broadening of my horizons, and you don't really get that in a perfect little beach town in Southern California.
Yeah, nothing really ever happens in Encinitas. It is like the perfect quintessential Southern California beach town, and it's pretty awesome. I mean, scenery wise and just the kind of the lifestyle, it's so laid back up there. I don't know. I've been in San Diego for off and on for about 10 years. And of all places, you know, it's funny because my friends and I back a few years ago, back in like 2006 or something like that, we were talking about the idea of a free state, the Free State Project in New Hampshire. You've heard of that?
Sure.
Yeah, so we were thinking, well, that's kind of a lot. That's a big chunk, like to try to take over a state and free it up. But why not just take over a city? Not a major city, because most major cities are just so far gone with politics that it would be really hard to do. But we were thinking, like, why not create a Free City Encinitas project? How many people live in Encinitas? Like maybe 20, 30,000?
Yeah. Probably, I don't know the numbers.
Yeah,
so sounds like a good number to me.
Yeah,
sure.
so we were thinking, well, how hard that could be. The place we start. We start in Encinitas and free that place up and kind of convince everyone of the merits of voluntarism and freedom, and then we go from there. And then we could talk about San Diego and bigger cities. But
well,
yeah.
I think part of the problem with a place like San Diego, and this is one of the good things about it too, is that it has such a big mix of different viewpoints.
Yeah.
That I think you'd have a really hard time getting everybody on board with the voluntarist perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right. I think that's pretty much everywhere. It's tough to have anyone agree on anything. But yeah, it's San Diego's a place where it's not there's not one direction that people kind of think. It's kind of all over the map, and it would be really tough. But in terms of just freedom itself, how do you define freedom, or what is freedom like to you?
Freedom to me is when you're in control of your own actions. Mm-hmm. And very few people actually are. And that applies on many levels, of course. It's an internal thing, having the freedom to move boldly where you want to without fear, without emotional limitations, without obligations to your family, to society, except those obligations, of course, that you choose to take on. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, on the physical level, freedom from physical limitations, from people who would prevent you from doing things, from laws that keep you locked in one place, from international borders and taxes, or any of the many, many restrictions we face.
Yeah. Now, how, as far as the last stuff, like, how have you been able to create that in your life, or actually all of it? I mean, how have you been able to create some of this freedom that we're talking about?
Well, I'm very reckless. I've become less so over the last few years as I've hopefully matured a little bit more. But when I started, I was extremely reckless. Like, Costa Rica's fine. Nothing bad is going to happen in Costa Rica. It was a great year of my life. But since then, I've gone on to do much, much more reckless things and had some very terrible but eye-opening experiences as a result. And but it's that recklessness, that with the risk comes experiences that most other people don't get to have. And now it's hardened me. It's shaped me in a lot of ways. And I'm very, very bold now. I think the recklessness has transmorphed into a sort of boldness. I think boldness is recklessness plus experience and maturity.
Yeah.
Where now when I want something, and I know it's a rational want, and it's actually a true desire that I have, not just a passing temptation, I don't even stop to think, well, that won't work because blah, 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 or, whatever, or I'm afraid to try that. It's too big of a goal. I just say, what do I have to do to make this happen? Let's start doing it today. It's just this straight laser-like path from where I am to where I want to be. And sometimes I change my mind later on down the road, or it proves to actually be impossible or infeasible, but I don't second guess myself very much. I'm very confident now.
Yeah. Now, what are some of the things? Can you talk about some of the? You said some terrible things that happened. Were you thrown in jail?
No, not that. Not quite. I've been a lot of places now, and that's a relative term, of course. The world is huge. I've been more places than most people and less than some. I've lived in about 12 countries now, in 4 continents. Usually for about 3 months at a time. So long enough to kind of actually get to see what life is like there.
Yeah.
And your perspective changes so much with every new society you encounter, every new lifestyle you live. And it's very different when you travel as a tourist, because you're kind of far removed from the people you're living among. You're kind of almost living over them or apart from them. But when you go somewhere and work, I worked in education in several countries as an English teacher and as a private tutor. Mm-hmm. Anywhere from just terrible, terrible government schools in China, which pretty much made me want to kill myself.
Yeah, I've heard bad things. I've heard horrible things about that.
Yeah, to more like Montessori-type environments in Italy, to almost militarized private schools in Kurdish Iraq.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've been a few places, and I've seen, and education was a huge passion of mine, which some might consider ironic, considering my poor experience with public school, which I won't call education because it's not the same thing, but it is schooling. But education has been a huge focus of mine, and part of the business is I involve myself in now are all about self-improvement and developing the mind, and for kids and adults. So that's definitely bled through into the work I do now, but a lot of it came based in seeing how education was done in so many of these countries I went to, and just how different countries and different governments, different parents saw they had to raise their children.
Yeah, now, did you find anything out there that was sort of more along the lines of kind of unschooling or, sort of free education, like more like freedom education?
Well, there are pockets of resistance or outsiders, I guess, everywhere you go. Like even in China, which was the most statist place I can imagine, just so controlled and influenced by everything. China's like some terrible science fiction experiment to me that you can't really picture until you've been there. Just the mass scale of everything there. But even there, actually, it's interesting. I went from shifting between starting the conventional education teaching there in government schools and private schools, which was just a terrible experience, to finding a family who really valued me as a private tutor because they were looking for the exact opposite of all the other education options available to them. So they hired me full time just to come and work with their kids and teach them English and a few other subjects. So that's obviously the minority, and it's really quite a streak of luck that I even found these people.
Yeah.
But when we found each other, it just shows how badly they were looking for someone like me, and that kind of influence in their life. So it exists, but it's not really culturally accepted yet in any of the places I've been to.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not culturally accepted here in America either. So it's I think we got a little ways to go, but it sounds like you're doing some awesome work. Now, can you talk a little bit about Market Fit and how you started that and exactly what you guys do?
Well, the purpose of Market Fit, marketfit.net is the current title we're going with, is kind of to show people that ideas can become businesses very easily. And that's something I have learned through trial and error in all the traveling I've done, where I gradually went away from having actual jobs, which I was mostly taking for the experience because education really doesn't pay well anywhere in the world so far that I've found.
Right.
I gradually weaned myself off of that to being a part-time online freelancer, then a full-time online freelancer, gradually making more and more amounts of money. And now I'm finally turning it into a systematized business, which is the step most people struggle with, I think, more than anything else. Mm-hmm. That when somebody wants to start a business, the first thing they start thinking about is, well, I need a logo, I need a business card, I need a website, I need basically everything that represents the company, that becomes the face of the company. I need a popular YouTube channel and a Facebook fan page, and they're missing what the core of the business is, which, in my opinion, and I was on the website I just wrote today, I define a business as a systematized exchange of value for money. Mm-hmm. And that, without that, you literally don't have a business. You just have a face. Yeah. A face without a soul, nothing behind it. If you just have that core value proposition, as it's often called, that exchange of value for money, you technically have a business. And that alone can be extremely impressive. I know, because I started making tons of money doing the consulting and the writing and the business development stuff I do now without even having a website. For months, I didn't have a website. That's a recent addition for me. But the point is, the website isn't what gets people to give you money, nor is the logo, nor is anything else that you typically associate with a business. It's the unique value they add and the specific way they interact with someone, the specific problem they solve. So if you have a vague idea for a business, most people start with an inspiration like, I don't know, I want to help people lose weight or be healthier or something. That by itself is not a business because you're not creating value for someone. That's the inspiration for business. That's the outcome of the business. What most people struggle with is then turning that into actual products and services that people are willing to pay a lot of money for. Mm-hmm. When you do that, then you start constructing the story around that, and you turn it into a system, and you start telling that story to the people who are most inclined to have that problem and want it solved.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Now, so you mentioned that you had done some consulting and some writing and things like that, and were getting paid without having a website. And how did you do that? Were you just networking a lot, or how did people find out about you?
Well, for me, it started with using freelancing websites such as peopleperhour.com, which was sort of a testing ground for what I could offer the world and what they were willing to pay for. And from there, it just branched off into repeat clients who kept coming back to me for more and more jobs. They'd tell their friends. And it got to the point where I'd start pitching myself in person anytime I met somebody who I thought was a good fit for what I had to offer. And for me, the hardest part is really niching down and specifying exactly what it is I offer, because I feel like I have so much to offer. And I think most people, again, are stuck in that state where, to use my earlier example, if you know you want to help people lose weight, well, there are 100,000 ways you could do that. You could write a book about losing weight. You could become a personal trainer. You could implement, a new nutritional supplement that burns fat 20% faster. The list could go on and on. So defining it down in a way that's easily understandable by the human mind is really everything. My greatest strength is not that I'm a social butterfly, or I'm a huge introvert. I don't really know that many people. I forget names and faces super easily. That's not my strength. Some people are really good at that, just meeting tons of people and connecting. My strength is having that really direct, really personal sales conversation, but I don't even like to think of it that way, because most people think of a sales conversation as adversarial, like I'm trying to trick you into giving me your money. Yeah. But I view it more as a partnership. It's synergistic. If you have a problem and I can solve it, then I want to help you do that. And the point is not to trick you or convince you. It's just to show you that I can solve your problem. At that point, you're happy to pay me if you actually have that problem and you believe that I can solve it for you.
Yeah, exactly. So do you have like a formula that you go through, like a series of questions, or how do you set that up?
There are patterns, there are guidelines, but really it's totally different and unique for every person. And it depends what it is you're trying to sell, of course. But to me, it usually starts with asking questions. If I've identified that this person is, to use the term, qualified for what it is I offer, then I start by asking them questions about their experience with that thing. Like if I know somebody's trying to start a coaching practice, I'd start asking them, well, what's your experience with coaching? Have you ever tried charging money for it? And if they've been doing it for a while, I say, well, what's holding your business back? Are you not getting enough clients? Are they not willing to pay enough money? Are you not explaining how your practice works well enough? And this can go on and on for hours. But what usually convinces someone, even someone I've just met, to start giving me money is that I give them something of value for free. I give them the first little taste for free. I say, here's what you should do. Here's how I can help you. Here, take this piece of information. It'll change your business if you just did this one thing. And I do that just talking to them. I don't even bring up money or anything. At that point, they know that I'm legitimate. They don't need to know anything else about me. They don't ask if I have a college degree. They don't ask if I have any professional training or how. I mean, I look like I'm 19. I don't. It's terrible because I feel like I have the mind of a very much older person. But so
can I ask you how old are you?
I'm 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I have many things working against me. The lack of a formal education, the lack of what people would call a real work experience. But I know what I'm talking about. And if I don't, I won't talk. Yeah. So what I'm good at, I'm very good at. And it's just about me getting you to see that. That's my strength as a salesman, and that's how I get a lot of business. Other people have other strengths, and part of what I do is helping them see what their strengths are and employing those, maximizing them in their business.
Yeah. So, and you're a location independent guy, so you're basically getting your clients or the people you're working with are all over the world, right?
Yeah. More recently, it's been local since I arrived in Bali and Ubud about 2 weeks ago, because there's big population of expats here working locally or online. And so I've been making some really good connections, and it's really a very good fit for the services I offer. Lots of people want to learn how to make more money with the skills they have, or they want to take some wild, ambitious idea and turn it into an actual business. I tend to focus on people who have humanitarian ideals. Like they don't just want to make a business selling widgets for the sake of making money. They want to actually improve the world in some way on a social level or an individual level. And Ubud is full of those people. But yeah, a lot of my clients are everywhere you could possibly imagine, in Europe, in Australia, in the US, in Africa. and I converse with them through email or through Skype. If I can just get them to talk to me, then we can start making things happen. After the first job, 99% of the time, they're very satisfied with what they're getting, and I'm their go-to guy from that point on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, how did you end up in Bali? Was it because of this kind of entrepreneurial community or something else?
It's a process. I mean, pretty much every time I arrive in a new country, I start thinking of where I'm going to go next. And I can leave. I can leave any time. Everything I own fits in 2 bags. All my obligations are online. So before this, I was in the Philippines, and before that, I was in Italy. And I didn't know I wanted to come to Bali until I was in the Philippines and spent a few months there and met enough people who had been to Bali that I said, well, that seems like a good next destination, and I'm not very far away. Let's just buy a plane ticket and see what happens.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've been to Bali, and Ubud was definitely my favorite part, even though I'm kind of a beach guy, but I think that's like the best area, partly because, I think that it's kind of easy to live there, and then it's also like the weather is a little better, it's a little bit cooler, and then like you said, I think that's where a lot of the expats are, a lot of things are happening there. Yeah,
it's an interesting place. It actually reminds me of California in some ways, with that kind of eclectic mix of many different kinds of people.
Yeah.
A lot of hippies, though, too.
Yeah, those damn hippies. So are you finding that you're feeling more free there in general? I mean, you've only been there 2 weeks, but like just kind of in general, do you think that you have some more freedoms there than in the U.S.?
Well, going back to that freedom is being in control of your actions. One nice thing about living in a place with a low cost of living but still making a first world wage is that your money goes a lot further, of course, which means you have a lot more freedom over your actions. You can live in a nicer place. You can travel more. You can, enjoy the little leisurely things of life that you might not if you were just barely managing to make your rent.
Yeah. Not
that I'm struggling financially or anything, but... And then being a tourist also grants you some sort of cultural leeway. Mm-hmm. And in some countries, that's dangerous because they expect you to conform exactly to how they do things. But sometimes being a white person in a non-white country, or being an American especially, we tend to have a reputation of just doing whatever we want. You can do that,
Yeah.
And people, if the people are used to it, if the locals are used to it, you can kind of just hang out, live a very leisurely life, doing whatever you want. And the police won't bother you if you're in the right place. Ubud's all right so far.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say in most cases, in most ways, travel definitely increases your personal freedom if you pick the right places.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, can you give a kind of an idea of the cost of living there in Ubud?
I would say right now I'm probably living on less than $600 a month. Mm-hmm. and that's a comfortable existence. I mean, that's not really sleeping in the dirt or anything. There are ways you can do that. There are hostels you can sleep at while I help her out with her website. And, I eat out, a fair amount. I don't have to. I could cut that out if I wanted to. But there's so many little raw food cafes here and interesting places to meet people. So I spend about $10 to $15 a day on food, usually. I rent a scooter for about $50 a month. And that's my basic living expenses right there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's amazing how you can travel and live in all these different places and spend less money than most places in America. And that's one thing that I run across here all the time is people will say, I'll tell them like, hey, I'm going off for a month. I'm going to spend some time over in Bali or something. They're like, oh, I wish I could do that. It's like, well,
you can.
You can.
Just buy the plane ticket.
Yeah, you could actually save money if you did it right. But yeah, so you were talking earlier about your business and how you kind of work with people that want to either do something to help improve like the world or improve a certain situation or improve themselves or whatever it is. Can you give some examples of that? Like what types of businesses and what people you're coming across are doing to help improve things?
Yeah, I didn't hear the whole question because you cut out a little bit, but I think you asked me what kinds of people I work with.
Yeah. So basically, this idea of improvement, like kind of improving the world or improving a certain situation or something like that. You said that's kind of what you look to work with, the kind of people you look to work with. And yeah, I was just wondering, like, can you give a couple examples of those types of people?
Yeah. So the trend I've noticed is that people think that if you're going to do something that's truly good for other people, it has to be like a totally altruistic thing, totally selfless. Like you can't possibly gain from it whatsoever. It has to be just this intense labor of love. And essentially your payment is the positive emotions you create for yourself by feeling like a good person. And I'm not anti-charity or anti-volunteering or anti-nonprofits or anything like that. I just think the profit system is the absolute best way to measure your level of success in what you do. Mm-hmm. If you can earn a profit helping other people in some way, not only is it good for you, obviously, because you're making money, but what it is a system to measure the success of your efforts by. And it's a way to grow your efforts. My goal is to help people who would otherwise be doing their, quote unquote, altruistic activities in the world and turn them into a way that's actually repeatable, sustainable, and profitable for everyone involved so that they can become larger, they can become more complex, and that they can become more helpful to the people, whatever it is. I mean, right now it's a lot of people who work on the personal level because it's an inherently less complex, like a lot of consultants and coaches and teachers. I really want to get more involved with alternative education institutions. There's a school here in Bali called the Green School, which is sort of an off-the-grid, very alternative school that I want to start working with, but I have to talk to them. And it goes all the way up to major social initiatives. Like if you've invented something like, I don't know,
Bitcoin.
Sure. Bitcoin's a great example. And that's another one I see a lot here too, that it's sort of a labor of love for people. They love preaching the merits of Bitcoin and how it can potentially change the world, and it's so liberating for people. And I say that's great, but no one cares until you say it in a way that answers their most pressing demands. That's what it all comes back to. Whatever it is you're talking about, the larger message or philosophy you're trying to preach, if you want to make it a success in the market and if you want people to pay you money, again, not that it's necessarily about the money, but it has to come down to a simple, explainable problem that you solve. Something, we all have things that if somebody says the right sentence at just the right time, it instantly grabs our attention. Right. Because our brain is in sort of a scanning mode. If your car breaks down, if somebody says to you, I can fix your car, immediately you say, oh, okay, come help me. If your car isn't broken, you're going to ignore every mechanic you see passing down the street.
Right.
If you're not actively asking questions about an alternative cryptocurrency, you're not going to pay attention no matter how many times you hear about Bitcoin in the news or see the young libertarians preaching it in the streets.
Yeah.
But if you can learn to phrase that in a way where, hey, did you know you can transfer huge amounts of money with hardly paying any transaction fees whatsoever anywhere in the world in just a few minutes?
Yeah.
Really? Well, I send money internationally all the time, and all these transfer fees are killing me every time. How do I do this? Is it a new bank or something? That's an introduction to a conversation that can actually turn into action. Ideas have to turn into action at some point.
I mean, not to get totally off track here, but that's what I love about Bitcoin is that it's not a philosophy that anyone needs to go and convince people of. And you can talk to everyone about Bitcoin. I often do that when I go to restaurants and things like that. I'll ask the server or somebody, have you heard of Bitcoin? But the bottom line is nothing's going to change until the need is there, unlike you were talking about. And so if, let's say, the dollar really does crash at some point, then people are going to start looking at, well, what else, what other kinds of currencies can we use? And that's where Bitcoin rises, just like what's happening in Argentina, where people are actually starting to use Bitcoin because there's just that's just the best option, not because they've all of a sudden developed some philosophy of anarchism or something and they're all enlightened. It's just because it's the absolute need, and that's where they're turning to.
See, but if you want to be a Bitcoin entrepreneur, you have to find a way to tap into people's needs now, because that's what creates a sale or a conversion. You don't wait until the problem is obvious and it's smack in their face. You get them to see it now. Yeah. It's not swindling. It's not dishonest in any way. It's just calling their attention to something they weren't really paying attention to before. It's like walking around with chronic back pain, but being so busy all day that you never stop to think about it. If a chiropractor were to come along and say, hey, do this simple 5-minute thing and it'll solve your back pain, it'll instantly grab your attention, this thing you've been ignoring and not thinking about. We all think about money. We all think about debt. We all think about how it affects our personal lives, but we don't necessarily think about the larger macroeconomic scale of things. So as long as you keep talking about that, you're going to lose 90% of people.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. So you mentioned in one of the emails you sent to me that you're a voluntarist or a voluntarist. And so how do you see getting to the point where we live in an actual free society? I mean, do you think it's a combination of a lot of things, or is there one path that you think is going to get us there?
To a point of an absolute zero state worldwide situation.
We're dreaming here.
I think social revolution of any kind happens in small pockets first.
Yeah.
And, there's a saying that in every conversation, somebody is being sold. If your job is to convince people of the concept of a limited or a zero government, or, which again isn't even really the argument you should be having. That's not the conversation you should be having, because that's an anti-conversation. That's fighting something that exists. And that's really not what you should be trying to do here. What you should be doing is building a solution, building something better. When you can convince someone, all these things the government provides for you, like the police and the firefighters and currency, and among all the other major things that people rely on to function in society. When you can say to them, look, here's a better way to do that. Here's a way where you'll be more protected from criminals and fires. And here's a way where your money won't lose value every passing year, and you'll be able to transfer it so much more easily and all these other advantages. That's a conversation that gets new ideas flowing, because it appeals to people's selfish desires. And we all have those. We all are concerned about taking care of ourselves and the people we care about. So when you can talk in that way, you'll start to create converts, for lack of a better word. But to get to a point where everybody's on board with that, there's so much inertia in the opposite direction right now that needs to be overcome first. So yeah, you're going to convince individuals here and there, but as I learn every time I go to a new country, the world is so much bigger than most people realize. There are so many minds that need to be changed. There are so many physical and intellectual barriers that need to be crossed that I think, I hear people occasionally say things like, within two generations, we'll have a completely free society all around the world. And I have no idea why people think that that's feasible. I'd love it if that happened. I just don't know how you dismantle thousands of years of government infrastructure that have just been passing on from generation to generation to suddenly nothing.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Now, how did you get to this philosophy? I mean, did you read what kind of books did you read, and what did you listen to, and things like that?
Well, I was always an anarchist. I just didn't know there was a word for it.
Yeah.
Politics never made any sense to me whatsoever. I cannot ever remember a time, either being a small child or a teenager or anything, where I felt like I actually understood why people were Republican or Democrat or anything, and how the voting process worked, or why we needed people to make all these decisions for us. And I can remember having many intellectual arguments with myself in my head about how public things were funded, and why couldn't they just be paid by the people who were using them. These things were very intuitive to me from a young age. I just didn't understand there was a group for people like me, or a word to label us.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I took the V50 lectures, a recorded audio program that was initially released by Andrew Galambos and then by Jay Snelson later on, that kind of was just, over the course of many sessions, they walk you through the intellectual premises behind statism and behind the free market, and explain that, if you understand that the principles of the free market work in one situation, which I think most people are smart enough to understand, things like supply and demand, and how capitalism, creates competition, and that creates better quality products, and people can choose for themselves what they want to buy, then logically it works in every situation. It works in every good and service on the market, which includes all the goods and services being provided by collectivism. So when you just accept that as a total concept and realize there isn't a flaw in the logic, and any flaw you think you can find is just an appeal to sympathy because it's an emotional demand, you don't like the idea of poor people starving.
Right.
To me, it was just a very logical, straightforward approach to understanding the problems of the world. If people don't have enough food, there's demand for food producers to come in and give them more food. Well, why aren't they doing that? Well, there are restrictions. There are borders that prevent them from doing that.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to. So your traveling has brought you to kind of show some evidence of that, right?
Yes, and what I see, by and large, is a refusal of people to take responsibility for their own lives. Mm-hmm. That's what I see especially in third world countries, though it's definitely prominent in many of the first world countries I've been to also, is that people believe their lives are just at the mercy of reality. That whatever happens will happen. Hopefully things will work out. Hopefully I'll get lucky. Hopefully my government will be there for me. Hopefully my God will be there for me.
Or in Bali, your gods, plural.
Yes, your gods, many of them, and there's the statues that represent them everywhere. I think that's why we live in the world we do. I think the government and just that level of restriction and control and fear is all based on the individual level of not feeling in control of your own life, not feeling confident in making things better for yourself. Mm-hmm. Most people who are born poor will stay poor their entire lives, sometimes because they don't have very much opportunity, but a lot of times, most of the time, just because they identify themselves as a poor person, and they will just continue to be that way. I'm the kind of person now where when I want something and it seems like an impossible task, first thing I ask myself is, okay, how do I make that happen? What do I have to change to make that happen?
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, one thing that I wanted to get to is, this is really interesting because you and I are kind of aligned on this as far as how do you change things. Well, you start with yourself, and then, entrepreneurialism is really the way to go. But with kind of accepting this philosophy that, we're kind of working against the system, or at least our thought process is kind of like, everything kind of sucks. It's like every country you go to has got some new sort of bureaucratic rules that are going to stop your freedom. Now, how do you deal with that mentally? Like, how do you continue to be positive and move forward when you see all this stuff around you and people reinforcing the belief system of statism and we have to bow down to this government that we don't even believe in, but of course that's just the system?
Well, it's been a long process for me, like most things. I think after a while, you sort of have to become selectively numb to it. I think when you see enough evil in the world of any kind, at first it shocks and it jars your system. And there have been times where I've felt totally hopeless. China was a big example for me. I survived 6 months in China watching how government schools work there. That was enough to really just dismantle my understanding of how the world worked.
Yeah.
And, and I'm sure there are even far more terrible places. Like, I haven't been to Africa yet, but I've heard pretty terrible things about the level of poverty there. So when the brain experiences an extreme like that it previously wasn't ready for, you can either choose to shut it out completely and not pay attention to it whatsoever, or you can choose to take it in, to actually try to empathize with the people you meet and you see going through this. And trying to take on that much suffering at the same time can destroy you. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Physically and emotionally and spiritually, for lack of a better term. And you either stay in that place and maybe stay depressed your whole life, or you learn to make something useful out of it. That's the route I've had to take. That I'm a person now who cares very deeply about making the world a better place in any way I know how. And I know that's such a monumental task, that there's so much about the world that needs to be improved, and that's a huge part of the reason I focus on business development for people who want to make the world a better place, because now I'm indirectly working through them to make the world a better place. You use that as fuel, that understanding, that suffering that you've seen and that you've felt, that becomes a huge part of your motivation. I'm the kind of person, I want to have kids someday, hopefully in the next few years. I want to raise them in a world where there is hope, where things are getting better every day. I want to raise them under positive circumstances, but I want to also show them this is what else is happening in the world. There's a lot of darkness out there, and we're very lucky, and we worked hard to be able to live in the light. But you need to appreciate what you have, because there's so much more out there that could be worse.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I try to kind of hold on to things that I see, that just little glimmers of hope. Like, I'm in Austin, Texas now, and the city council here they had a ban on all the ride sharing services, Lyft and Uber and everything. And like, that was really a bummer to me, because I used those a lot when I was in San Diego. I was using Lyft all the time. And what a horrible thing. I mean, every other city in Texas even has these services available, and the Austin City Council was bought out by basically the taxi unions and all that. And so they took the stance of, well, this is dangerous, so we have to make it illegal. But the company Lyft, they fought the city council for a while and wanted to try to get it overturned, that wasn't working. So instead of just kind of going, okay, we'll just agree to your regulations, they came into Austin and they said, okay, we're going to start this anyway. And everyone that signs up gets 50 free rides. So they basically skirted around the law, and they're using this tactic of just getting everybody on board with this. And then I'm sure at the end of the whatever time period, they're going to go and say, like, how do you ban us now? Like, we've got a whole army of people that are going to be really pissed off if you continue this ban. So I thought that was a really cool kind of anarchist move by them, and it sort of makes me happy,
And it was done without fighting.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. No, they didn't try to get anyone to vote. They didn't try to fight. They just said, no, this is what we're going to do. And of course, the city council is kind of, they're kind of like, wait a minute, you can't do that. But then they're like, well, we're not breaking any laws, so they're going to do it, and it's going to work because everybody's on board, and everyone needs this, and it also creates jobs. So people are going to be getting paid, and they're not going to want to give up their jobs, so they're going to fight it. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of things like that where I'll go, okay, there's hope. There's hope that people are going to eventually have to get it, that, this is what we need to do. It's not about just sitting around and waiting for things to change or voting for people or whatever. It's actually taking action and then seeing how that works in the marketplace. And that's how people get affected. And like we were saying earlier, it's kind of, it's when they're personally affected by it, that's when they change.
Right. In a business, a well-functioning, sustainable business is the vehicle through which this change enters the world. Mm-hmm. A service like that sounds very valuable. If implemented everywhere, that could save people a lot of money and a lot of time and make life easier for everyone. But you're not going to make something like that happen very effectively just by campaigning for it and preaching about it. You're going to make it happen by turning it into a business and getting your first customers signed up.
Yeah, exactly. So, I wanted to kind of wrap up here, but just to get into the location independent thing, that's a lot of what I talk about on my show, and I do it as well. Not as much as you're doing right now, but from your perspective, what are some of the ups and downs of being location independent?
Oh, a lot. I mean, it definitely takes a certain kind of person. And there are many different kinds of travelers. Of course, there are the minimalists who just live out of a backpack and go to a different place to sleep every night, living as cheaply as possible. I think every traveler, probably most travelers, go through that at one point, but for most it doesn't last very long. I'm more of what you'd call a slow traveler, spending a few months in every place before moving on to the next one. And if I find the place I want to settle down, then I'll stay there for a few years. And there are people who think you just need to move to a place. You research a place and you say, that's where I want to live. I'm going to buy a house there and I'm going to move there. And I don't understand that mentality at all. But, I mean, the advantages are, of course, that feeling of freedom, realizing that you can go anywhere you want and no one can stop you as long as you have the funds to provide for it. And that makes a lot of the world very available to you. The downsides are that, it's hard to maintain relationships sometimes, but it's extra relationships, because if somebody doesn't want to keep in touch with you just because you're on the other side of the world, then maybe you're a good friend to begin with. Mm-hmm. I've tried to be in long distance Skype relationships, and it's a very good test, because if you're still excited to see her face every single day through a webcam, it's probably a pretty good indicator you actually really like this person.
Yeah, that's a tough way to go, though. Skype interactions.
I guess it's just not feeling like you have a home.
Yeah.
And that's different for everyone. I don't really feel like I have a home. And maybe that's why I travel so much. Maybe I'm looking for that home. But it doesn't feel like it's in California. California is just where I came from, which is an arbitrary place I happen to be born. But your home should be where you're most comfortable, where you can be yourself to the furthest extent. I haven't found that yet. I've found varying levels of being close to that ideal, but I guess I haven't made the decision yet exactly where that's going to be, though I did buy some land in Ecuador because I liked it so much there.
Oh, wow.
But, ideally, I'd like to own a few pieces of property in places I like most.
Yeah, that's awesome. So are you planning on sticking around Bali for a while, or you don't know yet?
Probably a couple months. I mean, anything can change.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, tomorrow I could meet someone or strike some business deal that gives me a lot of incentive to stay here for a long time, or I could suddenly realize I want to get on a plane to Mexico, which is what I've been considering as my next destination. I just don't know when.
Oh, really? Do you have any ideas
But
on
yeah,
where?
probably a couple months. Yeah. I was just looking up a few places that are really well known for their expat community. One is San Miguel de Allende, which is like an artist, little colonial, almost European feel to it town up in the mountains, I think. Another is Chapala, which I've literally got the Wikipedia articles open on these cities because I was just looking them up before we started talking. But Lake Chapala is actually supposedly one of the largest congregations of North American expats in the world.
Oh, wow.
And in all these places, some of them have started to get a little more expensive just because of the tourist activity, but there's still, at least less than half the cost of living in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I like Latin America. Like I've been a lot. I've been to Mexico, so I kind of know what I'm getting into. Travel does that to you. Like I really feel like I have such a better grasp on the world now. Like I know what Europe is like in a general sense. I know what the Middle East is like in a general sense. I know what Asia is like in a general sense. Most people just know what they hear on the news.
Yeah, that's right. Not exactly the same thing. It's been kind of breaking up a little bit here and there, but it's actually overall it's been a pretty good connection. Do you have a good spot there in Ubud, or?
I'm actually at the sort of famous co-working space Ubud.
Oh yeah.
Have you heard of Ubud?
Yeah. I heard that. I heard about like about a year ago or something. When I was there, it was like, what was that, 2012, I think. And the internet in Bali was just awful. I mean, it just was like everywhere I went, I couldn't get good internet. I kind of gave up on the idea of working when I was there. But it sounds like things are at least a little bit better now.
Well, Ubud, I guess, is a very good response to the demand of so many digital nomads and entrepreneurs coming here. And I meet people here all the time. You pay a monthly membership to use it for a certain number of hours, but you get a pretty good look on all the different kinds of work people are doing online. And some of them are just freelancers making enough money to live on, and some of them are actually running businesses online.
Yeah.
And having a good internet connection is pretty important for that, especially if you want to be making Skype calls to your clients, which is a big part of what I do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's about it. It's been a really interesting conversation, and appreciate you coming on the show. And again, it's Gregory Diehl, and his website is marketfit.net. And if someone wants to get a hold of you, just go to the website.
That would be best. Or if you just want to send me an email directly, it's contact@marketfit.net.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again, Gregory, for coming on, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' Podcast. To break free today, head on over to freedomlovin.com and download our free guide. 7 practical tips to living free in an unfree world.